Hello, my name is Jordan McHugh, and today I'd like to explain to you how hunters and fishermen have allowed for wildlife populations to improve over the years. In the early 1900s, wildlife populations had almost been completely wiped out by hunters and fishermen. However, it is these same hunters and fishermen that have allowed these populations to flourish as they are again today. Simply just by purchasing license and donating to conservation groups, hunters have paved and fishermen have paved the way for the increase in wildlife populations. As someone who has volunteered in these conservation services, I can attest to the work they've done. And as a fishing guide, I can attest to how important it is for sources like these to continue to allow knowledge for the people in the future to be known. I will admit, hunters and fishermen are the reason we were put in the issue in the first place. There was the one overfishing and overhunting populations, but at the end of this speech, I would like for you to take away with the fact that hunters and fishermen have allowed fish and wildlife populations to grow where they are today. In the U.S., by the 1970s, wildlife populations were scary on how low they are getting. And according to the Vermont Fish and Wildlife website, Vermont native brook trout populations in the 1950s were going down almost 4,000 fish per mile every year. According to the National Forest Department and the Yellowstone National Park, bison populations in the 1960s were below 500. In the state of North Carolina, wild turkey populations had been whittled down to less than 2,000 birds, which is less than 1% of today's number, according to North Carolina Fish and Wildlife website. However, when people realized how low they were getting, the Fish and Wildlife Services needed to find a solution. And one of the first solutions was implementing hunting licenses. Just pieces of paper as small as this being charged to hunters and fishermen to have while they're out there was able to help start money for the Fish and Wildlife Services to start increasing populations. They were doing that by implementing new regulations and by hiring workers to enforce these regulations in the form of conservation officers. Private conservation agencies as well have done a huge part in this. They do similar work to the state, just on a private level, such as Ducks Unlimited. According to Ducks Unlimited, since they've been a thing, they restored over 15 million acres of wetlands across the U.S., which has allowed for not just duck populations, but for other wildlife populations to reboot across the country. Being that these populations have gone up, we've seen a huge upside in it. Yellowstone bison numbers have increased to almost 5,000. North Carolina turkey populations have increased to over 270,000 birds across the state, according to the North Carolina Fish and Wildlife website. And in Vermont, in the 1950s, they were losing 4,000 fish per mile a year. Today, they're gaining 4,000 fish per mile a year. However, this does not mean that wildlife populations are back to they once were. And it's something we probably have to accept, something they will never be able to do. We still have issues, such as, according to the Marine Big Fish website, and commercial fishing practices are just tearing apart fish populations. The Marine Big Fish people spoke on it how in the 1970s there were 500,000 wild bluefin tuna, and today, because of commercial fishing, these numbers have gone down to below 100,000. Same thing, and something similar happened in North Carolina. Brook trout populations have gone way down than what they should have been, due to logging and road construction. In North Carolina, in fact, populations are at an all-time low for brook trout. But if we can, in states like North Carolina, if we can implement similar practices in areas like Vermont, we can see change in this. If we can change the way we commercially fish, we don't have to use long nets. There are new practices such as geodomes that are a far more friendly way to populations and to just humans in general to get our food. So yes, hunters and fishermen were the ones that almost made wildlife go extinct in the U.S. However, it is because of these same hunter and fishermen we're able to get these populations back up by implementing fishing license, the money used for that, the money used for conservation agencies, new regulations implied by Fish and Wildlife Services that are ran by hunters and fishermen. Even though we are able to get these numbers back up, that does not mean everything's okay. We're still going to have to work our tails off to do whatever we can to get populations up to what they were once again, and to be able to hold it that way, and to teach the future on the importance of preserving these wonderful natural resources we are gifted with. The sources I used for this speech were the Marine Big Fish website. I used an article out of the Citizens Times out of Asheville, information off the Ducks and Linda website, information from the Vermont Fish and Wildlife website, information from the U.S. National Park System website, and information off the North Carolina Fish and Wildlife website.